My girl is just like any other. She goes through clothes like you wouldn't believe. If you haven't met Sahara yet, she's got these beautiful T-Rex racing crash bars and skid plate and all these great accessories on, but she wants to try on something different. So today we are actually going to take off the T-Rex racing crash bars and skid plate and install the Outback Motortek ones. Now, I kind of say that jokingly because Sahara here is a pretty girl and she does like new clothes. But in all honesty, there's a reason for this. The Outback Motortek crash bars just seem to fit this bike a little bit better for me. After doing the entire Nova Scotia trip with Steve and Jason, who have Outback Motortek crash bars and luggage racks and accessories on their bike, I started thinking about how this T-Rex racing stuff is so big and so beefy and so protective that it kind of detracts a little bit from the looks of the bike, in my humble opinion. So this is just a difference between the way the machining has been done on the different brands and the way the design has been done. I just think I like the Outback Motortek a little bit better. It's a little bit simpler, it's a little bit more minimalistic, and still provides all the protection that this bike really needs. Now you'll see when we remove this stuff how much weight I'm going to be taking off. And that's another big concern for me. Part of the reason why I bought the Tuareg was because of how light it was. So adding this additional crash protection, while being a very smart move, I think I can do it by keeping a couple pounds off as well, using the Outback Motortek stuff. And I'll give you one last little reason why I'm doing this. Occasionally, when I press the brake lever down here, my foot gets caught on the lower crash protection for the T-Rex racing bars. Mark with Outback Motortek East has been fantastic. He answered all my questions, has been a huge help to the channel, and we really appreciate it. So stick around, guys. We're going to walk you through the entire process of changing out the engine guards and the skid plate for the Outback Motortek setup.
Photo adventures is on the road.
Welcome back to Moto Photo Adventures, everybody, and as you have already figured out, we have a brand new Aprilia Tuareg 660 that we are using as our project bike for this year. So today we're going to be doing this new video where we're going to be installing the Outback Motortek crash bars and engine guard. Now, Outback Motortek already has fantastic videos on just the install process, and of course they have great tech support, but they don't have a single video that installs both. So you have to sort of watch both of their install videos and sort of figure it out. With this video today, we're going to install both products simultaneously, and you're going to be able to see how easy it is to do all this. So to get started, I'll walk you through all of the pieces and parts and the tools that you are going to need. Let's start over here. You've got the Outback Motortek crash bars. Unlike the T-Rex crash bars, which are two-piece on each side, the Outback Motortek crash bars are a simpler design with one piece on each side. And then there's a tube that goes between them, so a connector pipe, so we'll be connecting that as well. And of course you get all the important hardware that comes with it. Now most of this hardware is going to be connecting the different rods together, and then the hardware on this side is going to be connecting it to the engine mounts on the bike. I've got a couple spacers in here as well, so be careful to pay attention so you know exactly where each spacer goes as we go along. If you continue all the way to the other side of the table, let's talk a little bit about the bash plate. The bash plate is fantastic. It's a beautiful design. It's super solid, just like the T-Rex racing one. And you're going to find a couple of brackets that are going to be important in the install process, as well as the appropriate bolts. So we'll get into how each of these pieces fits together as we do the install. Last but not least, let's talk about the tools you will need, and there's not that many of them, guys. Basically, you will need your typical ratchet, and ratchet extension is going to be really helpful as well. Highly recommend that for one particular location. In addition to that, you'll need a couple Allen keys, or in this case Allen sockets. Definitely want a 8mm and a 5mm Allen. For the ratchet, you're going to have a couple of sockets. This is a 13mm, a 10mm, and an 8mm. As far as spanners, we have an 8mm, a 10mm, and a 13mm. Now the interesting thing about the 13mm is I actually picked up one of these with a ratchet in it. So if you can see, that's got a ratcheting mechanism to it. And that's going to be really helpful because one of the bolts that's a 13mm is very hard to get to up underneath the exhaust. You don't have to have it, but it'll be helpful for you. And before we can put the new Outback Motortek stuff on, Sahara says we got to take the T-Rex stuff off. So let's get to wrenching. And just like that, Trinity is naked once again, just like she arrived from the factory. We've taken all the T-Rex stuff off, and Carl has mounted everything. We've got everything on his bike, and he's headed home. We're going to now install the Outback Motortek crash bars. And if you want a little extra guidance, I would highly recommend going to the Outback Motortek website, and you can watch the install videos for each component separately. However, they don't have a video, and I can't find one anywhere, that shows how to install both the crash bars and the skid plate at the same time. It saves you a little bit of time and a couple extra steps if you install them at the same time. So that's what we're going to do today. First thing you need to do is, in preparation for the skid plate, there's a couple of little 10mm bolts. So one's way back under here, and then there's another one on the other side. So we're going to go ahead and remove those in preparation for the brackets that will hold the skid plate. Let's do that first. All right, once you have that bolt off, you just take the bracket, the rear bracket for the bash plate, and it's going to go in right there. You want to make sure that it is angled inward. So it's a right-hand angle, and they're both going to be angled inward. Coming back to this side, we're going to install the same bracket on this side with the 10mm hex head bolts. Once the rear bash plate brackets are installed, we're going to proceed with the installation of the front left crash bars. And to do that, we'll be removing the two engine bolts from here and here. Once we have the OEM bolts out, we're going to be replacing them with the two M10 bolts. Basically the longest M10 bolts, there's two of these. One is going to go on the left side, one's going to go on the right side. The left side is going to use a 15mm spacer, and the right side is going to use a 20mm spacer. In the back here, the shortest M10 bolt is going to have a 10mm spacer. And then on the far right-hand side, the back is not going to have a spacer. It has an OEM spacer that we'll be reusing. I'm going to put the 50mm M10 bolt in and the 10mm spacer. Just get that hand started. And then here's where we're going to find a nice savings in our process by installing both of these together. I'm going to take one of the 65mm bolts, and I'm going to run it through the front bracket for the bash plate, and then through the left side crash bars, and then I'm going to install the 15mm spacer all at once. If you had to do one of these separately, you would have to remove this bolt to put that bracket on, so this saves us a little bit of a step, which is kind of nice. It's worth noting when you are installing these, you want to make sure that everything is left a little bit loose. You're just giving everything a nice fit, making sure that the bolts are lined up nicely and not stripping any threads, but you're going to leave them loose until everything is installed, and then come back and tighten all the bolts once you have everything fitted right. Installing the cross brace is the next thing I'm going to do. You can start on the other side first if you prefer, but since we're just going to loosely put everything in place, this makes more logical sense to me. Just finger tighten those two little bolts that came with this, the ones that did not have nuts on the end. Switching to the right side of the bike, we're going to basically repeat the process, install the right-hand side of the engine guards. I'll be using the long bolt in the front using the 20mm spacer, as you can see I've got here. And just remember to add the hanger piece for the crash bars all at the same time. That way you can save a step. Just a quick note, when you install the bolt in the back, there is an OEM spacer. You want to make sure you keep that. The final piece to the crash bar puzzle is to connect the three components together. Again, remember to just loosely tighten them at the beginning here. We will go around and do a complete tightening at the very end. Now that all the supporting characters are in place, it's time to install the bash plate. And if you'll notice down below here, it's really helpful if you can find a box of some sort or an old toolbox that can hold it up a little bit for you. And of course, a little bit of your toe doesn't hurt either. But essentially now you have 8 little bolts. They're countersunk to go in place of various locations around the bash plate. And once you get those installed, you can start to work on tightening everything. Just take it easy, take your time. Slow and steady wins the race. Sanka,
Ja, Mann.
are we dead yet?
No, Mann.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Working in South Carolina heat is a peach. And we are not as young as we used to be. But we got it all on. Now I'm just going to go around, of course, and make sure that everything is super tight. We do have nylock washers everywhere, so it's not that big a deal, but I may put some blue Loctite on everything. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's not that bad an install, and by doing both the bash plate and the engine guards at the same time, it really saves you a couple of little steps, and you can install it all at once instead of doing piece and piece and then having to remove bolts and stuff like that. I will say though, there are a few bolts that you really have to reach in tight to get, and that's one reason why the, where did it go? Oh, if you have the little ratchet spanner wrenches, those are a huge help. I got the 13mm specifically for this job, and it paid for itself, I promise you. I would have also gotten a 10mm if I was going to do it again, because there is one bolt in there that my old man fingers just had a little trouble reaching, so that would have been a little time saver. So that's just a little tip for you. I will say overall, the install is not that bad. It's about what just about any motorcycle part is. The tolerances on motorcycle parts and you know, working things into motorcycles are so tight. So I get it, but I wish some of the pieces were a little bit easier to reach. So for example, installing the bash plates, these little guys at the outer edge, I wish that Outback Motortek could somehow figure out a way to make these little bolts threaded so that when you tighten them, you don't have to hold a nut back there and you know, deal with dropping the nut and having to fish it out and all that stuff. In addition to that, I love this bash plate. It is super solid. It's every bit as good as the T-Rex bash plate, with the exception that the T-Rex has a little cutout right here. So when it comes time for me to do my oil change, I'm going to have to take the whole bash plate back off and deal with those little nuts behind there again. So maybe that would be a tip for Outback Motortek to think about in a future iteration. Take a look at the T-Rex one where they have this little window cut out, and then it's just a simple Allen key to take that window off, and you can replace your oil filter without having to drop the entire bash plate. And they also have a hole drilled in the bottom where the drain plug is. So you don't have to remove the T-Rex Racing bash plate to change your oil. With the Outback Motortek one, you will have to drop the bash plate. The hanger brackets will stay in place. You don't have to move the hanger brackets. So it's not that big a deal, but you know, when you're wrenching on your bike all by yourself, which we often find ourselves doing, every little bit helps. But other than a few niggles, as Jason calls them, when you are installing this, it's really a pretty easy setup. And I am in love with the looks of this, and it's exactly what I was hoping to find. You know, the T-Rex stuff was great, but it really just smothered the beauty and the slenderness and the sexiness of Savannah's, you know, styling. I really find that the Outback Motortek stuff, while providing all the same protection, is a nicer looking bracket. I'm really happy with the way it looked and the way it turns out. There's plenty of room here for me to hang my crash bar bags. And another really neat thing is that they have little tabs already installed for mounting fog lights. So that's a future video that we will be doing. I will be installing some fog lights on this bike. But that's really thoughtful of Outback Motortek to think of that and to have that already pre-drilled and ready for that installation. Overall, super excited. Can't wait to get this bike out and check it out in the dirt, see if I can feel how much lighter it is, because that T-Rex stuff is just a lot of weight that I think this bike doesn't need. And yeah, we're going to go out and have some fun. Thanks again for watching, you guys. Jason and I are going to go grab some sweet tea and get out of this heat. I hope you like this video. We sure slaved away for you. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and look for some future videos to come. We didn't get a chance to do it today, but I have a really neat video coming up where we wrap the exhaust pipe in exhaust tape to reduce the heat coming off the catalytic converter. So you'll want to see that for sure, and we already have a ton of great videos about the Tuareg in our Tuareg playlist. So go check those out in the meantime. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Moto